what is the roadmap to UX design? The way I see it is in a more practical way. You will have a lot of decision points that you need to make, and then you get the entire roadmap, which is again branched out, so that whenever you learn a few chapters, you know that okay, you have closed a bigger section of the entire roadmap. So I'll provide that. And what I'll also do is I'll also provide a few other options rather than UX design, because a lot of people are starting out from different origin points, right? Like some of them are from engineering colleges, some of them are from architecture background, some of them are already into graphic design jobs, and then they're transitioning. So in that case, how will your roadmap look like? So this is a generic one, but I'll also mention how will your roadmap look like in this video. There are about 100 lessons here, maybe more than that also you can add here. For the time being, I have added 100. Maybe in future I'll add more to it. So let's start with all the decision points. The first one is why you want to get into UX design job. From interacting with a lot of UX design aspirants, I have seen that majorly there are two reasons. One is they want to do something technical in terms of a job, or they want to do something creative, right? And when there is both, usually people get into graphic design or get into UI UX design, right? But if you are very tilted towards being a technical problem solver, then I would actually suggest that you look at other options as well. For example, your coding, development, analytics, data science, AI engineering, whatever, right? All of that is also very lucrative careers, I would say. So please go ahead and explore that if you are tilted towards being a technical problem solver. If you are tilted towards creative problem solving and you are interested in doing a technical job, then you should get into digital product. But in digital product also there are so many other things, right? Let's say you have these two interests, but apart from that your interest could be in writing only, right? Or it could be in visuals only, or it could be in strategic, right? So if it is in writing, then there are two kinds of job you can find. In product teams, you would find UX writing as your job. In marketing teams, you would find content writer as your job. If your interest majorly lies in visuals, then being an illustrator could be a thing, or being a graphic designer could be a thing in marketing, or you could be into motion design or editor. But if you are into strategic thinking, right, that's when you get into UX research and things like that. In general, I have seen that these three roles are pretty much filled up by this one position called as visual designers. The terms may vary, but you get the idea, right? You have both kind of jobs. You have your product jobs and you have your marketing jobs. So based on your interest, do check out all these things, because what can happen is you might just start with getting into UX, or you might just start with X and get into UX, right? X is basically you start with any of these jobs, right? And then you graduate into becoming a UX designer. For example, you could start with graphic design. You're, let's say, doing posters for social media. You're doing poster for different events of your company. You're doing a bit of website design and things like that. But then you are also interested in UI UX design, right? So you are also trying to learn on the sides, right? So you start your career here. You start earning some amount of money, start supporting your family, start paying your rents, start paying your bill, and you're also repaying your loan back, and all of that you're doing with any of these things. And then slowly you are also learning and trying to get into UX. So that can also be a roadmap for anybody, right? Again, we don't know what the starting point of everybody is, right? So everybody is not having this, what I call as the luxury of time, right? Some people maybe are in a position where they need to support their family as soon as possible. So for them, I'm saying that you can pretty much start at any of this point and then get into UX also. Do not take that pressure that you are in a bad market and you have to only get a UX job. So that's one point. And that's what I wanted to say here, that your vantage point is your advantage point. Vantage point is basically where you stand and what all skills that you have, what all background that you have. A lot of us do not understand that we already are having certain skills inbuilt into whatever these elements are. Like, for example, if you can speak English, then that's also a skill that not a lot of people will actually have. Like if you're proficiently speaking in English, right? I get a lot of queries saying that, can I become a UX designer without learning English? The answer is you're going to struggle, because what you're going to do by not speaking English is you are going to reduce the number of companies you can apply to. Maybe you have a decent idea about visuals. Let's say you have studied in an architecture college, right? So you have already gone through the grind of learning visuals, learning how hierarchies work, or if you have gone through, say, engineering studies, so you would have gone through some analytical thinking stuff, you would have gone through some strategic thinking stuff. Things like that are already inbuilt with you. It doesn't mean that you ever start with zero, right? That's what I was saying, that you always have a vantage point. So try to understand what you have, right? Again, when I'm saying understand what you have to go through this entire list and then see, okay, these are certain things that I already have, and then these are certain things that I don't know, so I'll work on building those skills up as well, right? And once you're done with exploring all of this, and once you have narrowed down that this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to do, the next thing is commit, right? Like no more exploration, no more wandering around, no more wasting time around what I want to do. Now once you have decided I want to do this, commit for the next 6 months, right? And when I'm saying commit, you got to be like expecting certain boring stuff to be done, expecting certain tough thing that needs to be done, and try to go deep into the subject. It's not like if you think that you are going to follow a few Instagram creator and they are going to give you bites of information and that is going to be enough. That is not going to be enough, right? Those are like small bit of what do you call re-engagement that they provide to you, right? So when you think about progress, always consume bigger chunk of lessons in order to feel progress, rather than celebrating smaller chunks of information and calling it progress. For that, I mean, if you consume this video, doesn't mean that like you have done a big progress or anything. If you consume this video and you are taking notes and you're going through this exercise and then deciding on what you want to do, that's when you should actually say that, okay, this deserves some celebration, that okay, I have done enough, right? What I've seen with this generation of people, I know I'm generalizing a generation here, but what I've seen is I have seen people watch 1 or 2 hour podcast and think that they have done a big progress and they need to celebrate by getting to watch 1 or 2 hour of Netflix. I mean, that's not how easy it is, right? Because the market is bad. I have been telling this for a very long time, and you guys pretty much know that the market is bad. The UX jobs are not that great. I mean, the number of jobs are not that much. So when you say commit, you got to like give 8 hours, right? If you're not doing anything else, then definitely give 8 hours to UX design, studying UX design every day. Or if you're in college, try to give as much as possible. Let's say it's 2 hour, 4 hour, whatever, right? But you got to give enough time to study, and you have to also your parents or tell whoever is dependent on your money, asking them that give me 6 months of time because I need to learn UX design, right? Then how you learn this UX design is again up to you, whether you want to go for a cohort or not cohort, or you want to learn on your own. Anything is like fine, right? I would actually always suggest that whatever you do, whether you do a MDes or not, whether you do a BDes or not, whether you do a cohort or not, always try to do self-study on your own, right? The main reason for that is any form of group learning always comes with this idea that it is designed for the slowest student, right? It is designed for the slowest student. Means if even if you are a fast learner, even if you know 50% of the things, you still have to be slowed down, because whoever is the slowest person needs to pass the exams, right? Or needs to also perform at that skill, right? So that's something that you need to keep in mind, that whatever you sign up to, make sure that you're learning on your own as well, and you're trying to cover all of this as well, right? Now, next is, what are the things that would be required for you before you start applying for jobs, right? So I would suggest that you create at least 2 case studies to collect feedback and then just throw it away, right? A lot of people think that their first project or their first long project, second long project, third long project, all of that needs to be in your portfolio. Actually, when you start creating all those case studies, you are most likely not at the peak of your skills, right? So I would suggest that you just create 2 case studies to throw it away, because you just are creating it for your own learning and collecting feedback, right? So don't put that into your presentation, don't put that into your portfolio, rather just use it as a tool to learn and get feedback. So first do that, then create these 3 case studies based on whatever you have learned so far, and then put that into your portfolio, right? Make sure that there are two versions of your presentation. So one is your self-explanatory version. So this could be like in a blog format, wherein you put down pictures and then you have written down whatever steps you have done, and then all of that is there, right? So that this is when you are applying for jobs, they will ask you for a resume and for a portfolio. This is what you should be sending: the clean resume and a portfolio. And then usually there are portfolio rounds as well, wherein they will ask you to present one of your work and then guide through or walk through the entire thing, right? So for that also create another version which should be a presentation. Like you should have a script in your mind and you should be going through each of your steps, explaining everything. So these are not the same thing, by the way. This will have a lot of text and explanation written. This will have very less text and you should be talking and explaining, right? So make sure you have these things cleared, right? And next thing is, before I jump into all these different lessons, what you need to understand is how your next 6 months is going to look like is something like this, which is initially you're going to be bombarded with a lot of new knowledge, right? So that's where you are going to feel progress, right? And then some of these lessons are going to be discrete and small, and some of these lessons are going to be lifelong. For example, I think one of the lesson here is communication, right? Chat, ability to articulate thoughts, right? Or ability to storytell. These are all lifelong skills. This is something that you will start here today maybe, or maybe you have already started and you need to hone it. But then what will happen here is you start here and it is a lifelong process of learning, right? And after a point of time, you will not even understand that you are creating progress or you're getting progress, right? So that also happens wherein a lot of skills, initially you will see this is a starting point, then this is the ending point of a particular value stream or a piece of knowledge or lesson. But then for a lot of other things you will not find a end point. So these are like lifelong things that you need to understand. So two things to understand: one is some of the lessons are discrete in nature, having starting point and ending point, and some of them have a starting point but do not have an ending point, which is actually good because you want to be a lifelong learner, right? You want to feel progress in your entire journey, right? For next 30, 40, whatever years. So this is how it's going to look like. Other thing is it is going to be front loaded, which means initially in the first 1-2 months you will be exposed to a lot of new topics, but as time goes on, 1 year, 2 year down the line, you'll find less and less new things in that particular domain, right? So this is something that you need to also understand, that the first 100,000 lessons are going to be within your first 6 months, and then slowly the amount of lessons that you are going to be exposed to are going to be lesser. Now let's look at the roadmap, right? And I'll tell you how it is divided. So first is thinking, and I'm a big fan of thinking. If you would have watched some of my previous videos, or if you would have watched some of my Instagram content, then you would know that I'm a big fan of thinking. Next is research. I'm going to learn a bunch of research stuff, and I'm also going to give you a recommendation in terms of a book which I feel is a must read. Next is how do you present the research? This is the research part. So research methods and how do you present it? How do you do usability testing, which is if you have created something, how do you test it out? Then you have planning and strategy. Next is interaction design. Here you will have a bunch of interaction design stuff. We'll get to it very soon. Wireframing, a lot of Figma stuff would be here. Writing, again, super important because 90% of our UI is written words. That is also very important. Visual design, development basics. Again, if you skip it, that is also fine, but I've just written it down for a holistic view. For example, if somebody is a developer and they want to get into UI UX, right? I want to tell them that you already have a vantage point, which is you understand all of these topics very well, right? That's one thing. Communication, of course, this is like a no-brainer for any job. It's not like only for design. Visual communication is very important, but in general, this part about prioritized skill selling, story selling, and writing, these are all important in general to any IT job. Then some skills around jobs, and then how do you take feedback and improve? All of these are different sections, and let's go through one by one. Again, one thing to understand here is you can basically start at any point. I have given you a particular sequence, but you can decide whatever your sequence is based on what your vantage point is and what your interests are. You can basically start off at any point and then try to get to all these branches, right? So let me start with my own sequence, right? So first one is thinking. This is one of those things which has a starting point but does not have an ending point, right? So you need to, explore around what is first principles thinking, what is second order thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking, systems thinking, and product thinking. Actually, second order thinking and system thinkings are also very closely related when it comes to very basic UI UX design stuff, right? I'm not talking about, designing bigger systems or service design level stuff, but just for UI UX design, second order thinking and system thinking are very close to each other. Again, critical thinking and product thinking are also very close to each other when you are solving very small and very specific lane of problems. But then I've just given it out for you so that whatever way you learn, be it your books, be it your chat GPT, be it whatever, just try to ask as much question as possible on these lines until you feel that, okay, now I understand what this is. And always try to ask ChatGPT, if you are using it, always try to ask, how is it practically useful? Give me some examples, right? For any topic, how is it practically useful, and give me examples of how a UX designer uses it in their day-to-day job, right? Always try to get to that. Now next is research. In research, I've told you that there will be three things. One is research methods. Second is how do you present what you have learned from the research, and then usability testing. In research methods, you must learn how to do secondary research, how to do surveys and questionnaires, how to do user interviews, how to do card sorting, and when to use all of these different methods, right? For secondary research, I would suggest that you use Perplexity AI. In terms of surveys, I would highly encourage you to, Google this or ChatGPT these things, which is what is a p-value, what are open-ended questions, because this is what I have seen majority of people do not get when they are doing these surveys, right? And then obviously use Claude. Claude is a AI to analyze. If you have, let's say, done a survey, you have got a lot of responses, you can upload that Excel sheet to Claude, or you can upload that PDF to Claude and then ask it to analyze. By the time you're watching this video, maybe other AIs are also capable of doing it. Maybe Google Gemini would have come up with this and things like that. But for the time being, you can use Claude. Research method, user interviews. Few things that you need to learn is you need to recruit users. You just can't ask anybody randomly on street asking for feedback. You need to ask your particular target users. So that is something that you need to understand. How do you recruit users? Second thing is, how do you script every question that you will be asking? Sometimes you have to go beyond the script to do your follow-up questions. Sometimes the follow-up questions are also part of the script, but many a times you got to develop that skill of, what do you call it? Communication maybe, or curiosity maybe, to understand more in depth, right? You also need to understand where to go in depth and where not to go in depth. So that is something that you need to build. And then finally use AI to analyze and make summaries, right? Again, you might have seen that this is a 2025 roadmap that we are saying, right? If this was 2023, 24, I would have not mentioned all of these, right? 2025, we have enough AI for our disposal. So let's start using it. Next, also start learning how to use card sorting. Card sorting will help you understand what are the different features that can be prioritized, or what are the different problems that are more important than others. So that's one thing. When to use which method is also very important. And for all of this, actually for the entirety of this, I would suggest a book called, I would give the link in the description, but the book is called Just Enough Research by Erica Hall. So please use the link and buy the book. Anyway, the next part is, once you do your research, once you have collected the data, you have collected the insight, the other important part is how do you present the research, right? So is it through persona? Is it through a user journey map? And in terms of visual design also, how do you present it in a manner so that there is a hierarchy? The most important part is at the top, and then if anybody wants to, get more information, then they can probably click and see more information on things like that. So understanding about hierarchy is very important. Information design, which is basically how do you, tell the story using data. Information design is actually deeper than that, but yeah, I mean, what I meant here in terms of information design is how do you picturize data, right? So that is very important. Storytelling, of course, this is also again very important, and I'm going to repeat it everywhere, but you get the fact that storytelling is going to be everywhere, right? It's all about selling what you have understood, selling what you have, and stuff like that. Next is usability testing. So this is about understanding what I want to build, right? And once you build something, usability testing helps you validate whether that thing is built well or not, right? So this is something that you can do. These are certain things that you can also learn, which is recruiting. Then how do you prototype for testing? Again, prototype for marketing, prototyping for stakeholder management. Stakeholder management means to show your boss that, okay, this is something that I built, does it look good and whatever, right? That is different. Versus prototyping for testing is also slightly different, because in that test environment, you're going to show that prototype and make them people, click here, there, and collect feedback on that, right? So think about that prototype is not going to be the same when you're doing for, different people. If it is for user testing, then your prototyping should have a different feel and should have certain different connections and should have different kind of flows to it. So think about it in that lens. And again, I can't explain everything right here, but you get the idea. Moderating sessions, which is if somebody is clicking here and there, and then how do you basically guide them through your prototype? That's one thing, without giving away the answers, obviously. Analyzing results and iterative design, which is taking all the insights from a usability testing and using them to iterate your design. Then comes planning and strategy. This is where you need to learn about how do you define a problem, how do you pick a problem, which is if say there are 10 problems, how do you decide that this is the problem that I want to solve, right? So that's one thing. Then feature list, which is if I want to solve this problem, what are all the different things that I need to build out? Then from that feature list, feature prioritization, which is which are the top features that I should, care for the most or needs to be visible upfront and things like that. So there might be few things that might influence whether certain feature is going to be prioritized or not. For example, criticality of that feature, frequency of use of that feature, compliance reason for that feature. For example, let's say I'm creating Google Pay, right? The most important feature is scan and pay. That is your frequent use case. But then that does not mean that you should not have help and support. Having help and support is probably a compliance thing, right? Or probably it's a very critical element. So that's why you want help and support, right? So things like that you need to think about when you're doing feature prioritization. Then obviously you need to learn how to do information architecture, and you also need to understand what are your constraints when you're designing it. Constraints can be your time, can be the knowledge that you have. Again, knowledge about your subject or let's say the domain knowledge. For example, you want to do e-commerce, but then you don't know exactly how the entire supply chain works, right? So that would be your constraint. You need to acknowledge that, okay, this much is what I have learned, and maybe there are more things around it that I don't know, but based on this much knowledge is what I'm building out, right? Time is again another constraint. Engineering can be another constraint and things like that, right? Next is interaction design. So in interaction design, one thing that is very important is how do you make somebody discover your feature or discover a particular point. So that's your discovery and signifier. These are the two concepts that you need to understand. Next is onboarding and educating. If it is a feature, somebody needs to be educated around it. Let's say it's not something that they use daily or they're not aware of it, how to use it, then onboarding and educating is very important. You need to think about flows like that. Then comes feedback. So whether something is an empty state, success state, failure state, warning state, loading state, all of these things about every particular screen or a database, let's say a transaction list or things like that, needs to be thought through. So you need to learn about these things. Then comes user flows. So how would the first time experience look like? Then how would any role-based experience look like? For example, consumer view versus creator view. A consumer do not need a plus button and a dashboard to look at their analytics and things like that, but a creator would need it, right? So if you have different roles in the same app, then think about those different roles. Milestone based, for example, if X event happens, then how would the experience look like? If those events do not happen, how would that experience look like, right? So for example, let's say you are providing a reward, right? Like complete 5 transactions and you will get X number of reward, right? Then you should think, okay, what happens after 5 transactions are complete, right? So maybe it's a different experience altogether after 5 transactions are complete. So think about it that way. Continuous usage loop. This is where most of your user flows end, which is they are usually a straight line. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then they form a loop, which is after step 4 this will happen, and then you land on the same step 3, step 4, step 5, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 3, right? So think about that as well. Let me give you an example on this. Google Pay, initially they will ask you, okay, scan the QR code. So let's say that is step 3, scan the QR code, success page comes up, transaction list shows up, one transaction comes into the list, you press back, and then you go to the home page. Again, you click on scan QR, and the step continues, right? So that's your loop. Most of the time you end up creating a flow that ends in a loop. Then there is also one more thing. I think let's call it drop off, but it is very much like error, which is if something is installing, if something is happening and you have stopped it in between, you got to also think about what happens if somebody comes back to that. For example, if somebody has added items to the cart and somebody drops off from that point, the next time they come up, the cart should be filled and you should be showing that there are items in your cart, you have left it there, right? So that feedback also needs to be there, right? Next is second order impacts, which is like I said, if one thing happens, the other thing also happens, right? For example, if the payment is successful, then you are adding an item to the transaction list. That's like a second order impact of what happens after a payment is successful, right? If somebody earns a reward, then where are all the different areas where you're going to show that they have earned a reward, right? So those are the things. Then you have emotional design, part of interaction design that you need to, this should be actually part of interaction design. So emotional design, you need to understand when to excite them, for example in success, when to guide them, for example if user is confused, when to prevent errors. Almost always you would like to prevent errors, right? A simple example would be, let's say you're asking user to enter their phone number, right? So instead of giving one block of input box, you give them 10 block of input boxes, right? What you're doing by that is you're preventing the error of entering 9 digits, right? Because when somebody enters 9 digits, they already see that, okay, one block is empty, right? That's how you can prevent errors. There can be inline feedback that you can also give in input boxes. So that's one thing. Surprise them with delight. Once in a while, you should try to surprise them with delight. But if it is very frequent, then the joke, when you tell it twice, it is not funny, right? Similarly, delight, when you do it too many times, it is not delight. So surprise them, right? Assure them if they are uncertain. I think that's what I was saying. Like assure them that it is just 4 steps that you will take, or only this much time is required to complete the loading of this thing, and things like that, right? Then think about long-term perception of your brand, which is what would the user remember about your brand after you take them through this entire experience, right? What would their gut feeling be? Think about it that way also. I know at a very low level design, you are not going to be, able to influence that, but definitely think about that, right? And then don't overwhelm them with information, which is basically don't put too many actions and too many text and too many information in one page. Always try to break it down into multiple pages. That is best. If not, then at least multiple sections, right? So that's your emotional design. Wireframing. Learn about low fidelity wireframing, where to use low fidelity, where to use high fidelity, and then learn about UI patterns. This is very important because there are so many UI patterns that exist, right? To do the same, let's say navigation, side navigation, you have different ways of showing the same thing, which is it can be a sliding cards, right? Or it can be that navigation bar wherein you can click and then it will change sections, right? Or why even side navigation when it can be a scroll on the same page, right? Just to reveal different information, there are so many different ways, right? Or it could be an accordion wherein you click on it, it expands. You click on another item, it expands. So to do the same thing, which is reveal information based on users' demand, there are so many different patterns, right? Your job is to understand which pattern to use where. What is the advantage and what is the disadvantage, right? So for that, what you can do is you can understand first of all the commonly used UI patterns. Then these are again interactive UI patterns, but pretty much the same thing. Obviously, all these, I don't know, I think you can just call it UI patterns. Let me just change it. Yeah, this is fine. And then look at all these different UI libraries. Okay, material design, bootstrap, Ant design, Apple iOS guideline. I would just suggest a material design and Apple iOS guideline. Read through it and try to understand everything that they have said, right? That would be very useful for you. Another person is Nick Babich. He also writes about these things. So try to, Google him and, get some articles out of this person as well. So here, let me just make it big. So Nick Babich, this one is Just Enough Research by Erika Hall. Okay. All right. Next is Figma. I think you can use this guy's tutorial to learn Figma. Okay. Also design pilot, of course. But yeah, need to understand basic navigation, creation, auto layout, prototyping, basic component library building, which is your design system or step one of design system. And then how do you annotate? I have all of this. I think till here I have it in my course called Learn Figma in One Day or things like that. I mean, search for it. You'll find it in my channel. And I'll build these tutorials also. But so far, no plans. Most likely in Jan or Feb, I'll be able to produce it. But yeah, this is something that you need to learn in Figma. Pretty straightforward. There are enough resources to learn Figma as well. But I would highly suggest this guy. And then let's come to writing. Like I said, 90% of our screens are actually written material, right? That's the best way to communicate anything. So you need to understand a few things, which is what is brand, voice and tone, right? Very basics of UX writing. Let's call it UX writing maybe, right? The next thing is you need to also have a bit of understanding of English and ChatGPT, right? And then of course compliance. Compliance is basically what are certain words that I need to include, right? I cannot do without it. For example, I was just recently working on something called as tap to pay, right? And Apple in their compliance or in their guideline, they have said whenever you are using our SDK or our technology to use tap to pay, right, you should always write it as tap to pay on iPhone, right? And T is capital, O is small, and whatever, right? All of that also guideline is there. So you need to be careful about that as well. Of course, in personal project that does not matter, but yeah, I mean for a holistic learning, I just wanted to keep you updated about that. Next is visual design. This is again super important. It is just getting more and more important over the time. Like earlier, there used to be people who can enter the industry without learning visual design and we used to hire them. But right now, what we are seeing is there are people who have all the other skills and then visual design skill. And then there are people who have all the other skill and do not have visual design skill. So you know who are we going to hire, right? That's something that has just become more and more important. And there are two things which are slightly bold here, and I wanted to mention that you need to constantly consume good aesthetics to create good taste. So some of the best apps go to Dribble. I mean, Dribble is not the best place to consume functional stuff, but good aesthetic is something you will find in Dribble. And then copy great products to create a sense, right? Which is, let's say, copy Airbnb screens, copy Instagram design screens, copy what else, Twitter screens and things like that, right? So you get a sense of scale and spacing, right? So how big will the button be, how much spacing should I give, and things like that, right? So I would highly suggest Airbnb as a good example. Try to consume a lot of Airbnb screens and Airbnb like screens, but don't get limited to only Airbnb, by the way, because there are different softwares with different complexities. So try to consume different softwares from different complexities as well, like Apple stuff, Facebook stuff, Twitter stuff. All these are like good UIs. Even Figma has a good UI team and good aesthetics team, right? So try to consume all these different kinds of art or aesthetics, right? And in terms of learning, learn minimalism, typography, visual hierarchy, color theory, iconography, branding basics, and illustrations and things like that. I actually have a book. Let me find that. So this book is called Design Elements, a Graphic Style Manual. Let me write it down here. Design Elements, Graphic Style Manual, which I found to be one of the best books for graphic design, right? Again, I'm not a traditional graphic designer, but I'm just interested in graphic design. So I actually, when I was at NID, I used to spend a lot of time in library. I had gone through a lot of books, but this one was something that I really liked and I bought it. Even though it is 2000 rupees, I still got the book. Although that time I didn't have that much money, but still I just really loved this book and I recommend this particular book to everybody. So this is a very good book for in general building all of this, also building good taste. This is a good book. For typography, there is this Ellen Lupton book, or I don't know. Thinking with Type is the book which is the easiest to suggest all the time, right? Thinking with Type. Again, I have a Xerox version of it. After buying this 2000 rupees, I didn't have too much money. So yeah, so these are certain things that you can get. Motion design is also something that you need to, get your hands on. especially the minimum stuff, right? I'm not saying go into After Effects or anything like that, but at least you should know how to do transitions of screens, right? Which transition works in which screens. Then also understand little bit of Smart Animate, which is one of your prototyping skill in Figma, and that should be good enough. And then start using Lottie micro animation, so that should be good enough. Also understand web layout and mobile layout. Mobile layout is pretty straightforward in general, but yeah, understand web layout and stuff like that, right? Development skills, again, no need to spend too much time on it. If you're afraid of coding, that is fine. A lot of people are. You don't need to get into too much detail, but at least learn how to use inspect element, right? Let me bring that up because this is more important than other. Inspect element and try to understand what is written there. So you need to have enough HTML CSS skill so that you read what is there in inspect element and understand what that means, right? Obviously you need to understand responsive design. For example, if some design is made on a big canvas, if the canvas is smaller, then how does that respond to it? The basic example is if you have built a website for desktop, how would it look like on tab? How would it look like on mobile phone? Then obviously difference between Android, iOS and web UI capabilities. That's something that you need to understand. And then your API calls. What is a API call? Also one more thing let me add, which is what is a client and a server basically. This much knowledge would be a good starting point, to be very honest, right? All of this database and I don't know, I mean, all those other things, it's fine. You don't have to be so educated around development, so that's fine. And start with communication. Like I said, is one of those analogous thing, right? Which is not a discrete thing. It does not have an end. Once you get into communication, it just does not have an end, right? But what you need to also learn as a skill is how to write without ChatGPT here. Again, 2025 thing that I need to say, right? Which is don't use ChatGPT when you're trying to explain your design, right? Write it on your own because you will have your own words, you will have your own thoughts to articulate. Of course, ChatGPT is going to make it sound good, but it may not capture your thoughts, right? That is a very important skill, which is how do you articulate your own thoughts? You need to learn to write, right? So don't use ChatGPT for this particular purpose. Again, I'm not an anti-AI guy, and you have seen that I have told you to use AI in so many other things. So yeah. Achha, in illustration, you can actually use this AI that I have created a tutorial about called Recraft. Check out, where is it by the way? Recraft for illustration, right? For illustration, use Recraft. For icons, use material design, material symbols, plugin. Plugin is for Figma for icons. Okay, let's go. So all these are for visual design, right? This I think you already know, right? You have to use basically Mobbin to get inspirations, Mobbin, Dribble and Pinterest and things like that. Okay, for your inspiration, consuming and copying them, right? This is done. I was talking about writing. Next is story selling. The idea here is you need to learn some form of selling and sales, right? So if you want to talk about what are all the skills that you have and you want to present your skills to the person in front of you in a job scenario, then you need to learn a little bit of how do you sell stuff, right? How do you sell something that you have? That is where your idea of story selling is going to be super important. So learn a bit of selling, right? Not much, but basics. How do you communicate? How do you open? How do you create a hook and things like that, right? Then prioritized skill selling, which is when you're creating a portfolio, there are so many skills that you want to show, right? But then out of that, what are the top 10 skills that you want to talk about, right? Because if you have 30 minutes, you cannot talk about all the 100 skills, right? Then in that case, what are the 10 skills? And those are the 10 skills that will take 15 minutes, right? So think about it in that way, which is prioritize the skills that you want to sell. And that is itself a skill in itself, which is how do you prioritize which skill needs to be sold. The easiest way is read different job descriptions that are posted on LinkedIn and see what are the different skills that you are looking for, right? And probably most likely those are the skills that will be prioritized, right? Then visual communication, this is very similar to visual design, but what you need to be able to do is say more with diagram than writing everything in text. Say more with diagram, highlight better with hierarchy. What font can be bigger, what font can be smaller, what can be gray, what can be black, things like that. Simplify concept with illustrations, right? Instead of saying something in a sentence, maybe at time you just break the monotonous nature of your presentation, which is all text, to bring some concepts of illustrations so that the pattern is broken. And then finally get attention with words and hierarchy and motions. With words means sometimes you can also write it in a way where it gets attention, right? Even the choice of words can get you attention, or the choice of sentence and structure and the content itself can get you attention, or hold attention rather, right? So think about it that way. How do you write persuasively? How do you write for engagement? How do you hook? How do you rehook? And all of those things. Hierarchy and motion, obviously that can also be used to get attention, right? Then next is job ready. Imagine that now you have done all of this. Now you have, like I said, you have these items, right? Which is all the 3 case studies you have, self-explanatory with presentation. Actually for presentation, 1 is also good enough, 1 to 2. Not all of them needs to be in a presentation mode because you'll not get time to present all of them maybe, right? But this is minimum. Let's say you have all of this, right? Now you are applying for jobs. So few things that you need to again learn and understand. In why I have put it inside a UX roadmap is because what else are you going to do with all this UX learning, right? You're going to apply for jobs. So that's why I feel applying for a job is a part of this learning tree, right? Which is to learn how to write good case studies, how to compile things into a portfolio, how to make a good resume, how to script your interviews. Script in the sense that you need to practice it enough so that whenever somebody asks you about me, your whatever you want to say, you are not thinking at that point, right? You know that, okay, these are the 4 things I'm going to say, right, in this sequence. So that's what scripting here means. Or if you have done a case study, you know that these are certain questions that they might ask, right? So for example, did you do some research on it, right? You should have an answer to those things, right? So when you write your case study down, think about all the different questions that somebody might ask, right? For that, you can also use ChatGPT. You can create a PDF of your case study, put it to ChatGPT and ask it, what are all the different questions I might expect on this? And then think about some different answers, right, for all of these questions. And then finally create a job tracking board, which is basically create a Excel sheet where all the different jobs that you're applying, what is the status of that job, when do you have to basically reach out to them again or remind the person who was supposed to, let's say, refer you. So all of that stuff is a job tracking board, and all of that skill is again required here, right? Next is feedback and improve. As you apply to any job, you would be rejected in most of them. Try to get the feedback from them, right? And that's the idea of applying at jobs and improving by feedback, right? Then you can also get your work reviewed by mentors or by your peers and try to improve from there. Or you can also study and improve, which is basically learning more and more things here. And then let's say there was some gap. Usually when we look at our old portfolio, we cringe because we have learned so much. Now when we look back at our portfolio, we see that, oh, this gap was there, oh, that could have been better, and this could have been better. So that's how you can also make things better, right? So all in all, this is the entire roadmap. I hope that was super in-depth and super helpful. What I'll also do is I'll provide a link to this Figma Jam board. You can also go through them one by one. If you have taken notes, then great, do share it with me on my WhatsApp community. And I would really appreciate if you take notes. I'll really appreciate if you're making progress. And do also let me know if you need a accountability partner, okay, or a accountability group, because this entire thing is a 6-month thing, right, or a 3-month thing for the fast learners, right? So if that is the case, then sometimes you just feel alone in your journey of learning, right? So if that is the case, what I'll do is in my community, which is a WhatsApp community of some 6,000 odd designers, right, what I'll do is I'll create a group called accountability groups, and you guys can every day post what you have learned, right? Every night at 10, we'll make sure that that is a ritual in our group, in our community, which is every night at 10 everybody post what they are learning and what they are about to learn the next day, right? Or what they are working on, what they will be working on the next day, right? So we can do that. We can create that mechanism. In my first video on YouTube, I've told that learning to become a UX designer needs an entire system. It's not just one course that will help you. It requires a community. It requires all of these tools and mechanisms. So let me know in the comments if you actually need a accountability partner or an accountability group like that, and I can create that for you. Alright, so that is it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know how this video was, and definitely subscribe to my channel because a lot of other things are also coming in, not just related to UX, but beyond that also you need to grow. So all those things are going to come into this channel. Bye bye.